Third couples night out. I see an awful lot of new faces here this evening. So thank you for making time at the end of your spring break to come on out here, enjoy some food, enjoy some a great talk. Thanks to everybody who was involved in making this a success. Thanks to Father Andy, who supported the idea, who made this possible, who provided the space, who provided the time so that this could take place. Thanks to Crystal Gibson, whose brainchild this whole thing was, who swept us all along with the idea, who had the vision, who puts in hours and hours of planning and coordinating in order that this can be a success. Katie Lyons, who coordinates the youth, spreading the net out there to get lots of people to come and help out with all the youth, to take care of the kids. The many families that offered their older kids to be helpers on their last evening of their spring break. Thanks an awful lot for the sacrifice that you and your kids made. For the food this evening, oh my goodness, Kathy Annalyn provided the desserts for us, so thanks to her and her team for that. And then Carolyn Davis, who every single time we get together for planning, I'm like, Carolyn, why don't we just order out pizza? It's going to be quick and easy and you don't have to do all the work. And she's like, no, let's see how complicated we can make it this time around. And then she just, I mean, the food just puts any other professional caterer in the Tri-Cities to shame. So thank you so much for None of them do it on their own. They all have families and teams that help out and support. So this is a huge, huge effort to put these things on. And so we really appreciate everything that everybody does. And to all of you for coming out. One item of business, at the end of the evening, could you please just take your name tag off and stick it on the tablecloth there? That's really our way of getting a head count to find out how many people were here. So we appreciate that. The real mission for the events this year, these couples night out events, is to strengthen families out of the conviction that if we build the family, that in turn can strengthen and support the church. Pope St. John Paul II recognized that as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. This quote of his has kind of underpinned the entire endeavor this year. And we've got a real treat for you tonight because we have someone with us who has worked with St. John Paul II. And whereas we can't provide you with any, of his first-class relics of that saint, as someone who's had contact with that saint, though, I guess you could kind of say that Sister here could be classified as a second-class relic, which should in no way be misinterpreted as any comment on her age being a relic or her importance being second-class. But she has worked together with him, and Sister Yvonne Mary Loucks of the Religious Sisters of Mercy joins us this evening. One of the treasures of our diocese is the Religious Sisters of Mercy, located here in Alma, not far away from us. And when 8 years ago or so, some of us got together and formed a small couples group, Catholic couples group, Shelley Storer asked Sister Yvonne Mary if she would be part of the group as our spiritual director. And so for the past 8 years, those of us in the group have gotten to benefit from her wisdom, her experience, the insight that she brings. And yet, despite those 8 years, it seems like within the past year, we really began to realize what kind of a treasure that she is, just what a resource that we have as she started sharing more and more about her experiences working in the Vatican. And then we knew at that point that she was someone that we had to include in our program this year for these events. To share some of the stories, some of the reflections with you. So if we could give a warm welcome for Sister Yvonne Mary. The format is going to be slightly different, as I'm going to stay up here with her. I'm just going to try to stay in the background so that the video can get her. But it's going to be kind of conversational. I'll only be here to prod her with the next question if she needs it. But she's got so much to talk about. maybe you could start off with just an introduction of yourself, your background, how you came to be here, maybe a couple of stories. You've told us some stories of some miracles that you've witnessed, Parkinson's healing, a child healed of deafness, if you want to just start off with that.
Well, I have one announcement to make first, if you'll be patient with me for that, Ron. And that is that MSU beat Duke. Okay, I'm really grateful to you for inviting me here tonight. And you know, for me, it's always a privilege to be able to talk about this. It was a great privilege of my life to work, to be sent to the Vatican to work directly under St. John Paul II. I didn't know that's what it was going to mean when I was sent there. I was assigned to work in the Vatican in the Secretary of State office. And so I went. I didn't even know what the Secretary of State office was. I got there and I found out that basically in the Vatican, the Secretary of State works directly under the Holy Father at his service. And in the Secretary of State, there are two sections. One is called Internal Matters of the Church, and the other one is Diplomatic Relations with other countries. And the Vatican has diplomatic relations with more countries than any other country in the world. So many times, peace discussions, peace accords take place in the Vatican because it's considered neutral, it's considered safe, and it's considered trustworthy. So very often, these kind of discussions between heads of state are held there. It was kind of baffling, mind-boggling to me to be able to see these people who came. I saw Gorbachev, I saw Castro, I saw President Bush when he was in office, and President Clinton when he was in office, because they came there. But all heads of state came there, so it was part of kind of the milieu that I was in. And but that was the diplomatic part. I was in the section of the Secretary of State that dealt with internal matters of the church. Internal matters of the church we've kind of all been exposed to most recently. And that basically one example would be the sex scandal, clergy sex scandal that has occurred in the last year. It's actually occurred many years ago, and it's just coming to the light now. That wasn't one thing that I dealt with, but those kind of issues are the kinds of things that we dealt with. So those came to our office, and we reviewed them. We sorted them in the sense that some things could be dealt with without having to go directly to the Holy Father. Some things could be dealt with in various congregations in the Vatican. For example, unfortunately, these are all that came out. I mean, whenever he was present, I had the experience. My office looked right over St. Peter's Square. How many of you have been there in the Vatican? So you know what St. Peter's Square looks like, right outside St. Peter's Church. Basilica. When my window looked out, as a matter of fact, my office was the office that was, if you looked up, if you were looking at St. Peter's Basilica, and if you looked at the buildings on the right, if you looked up, you would see an image of Mary, it was a mosaic, but it was quite high up, and that was my office. It was right there. Every morning, when I walked in my office, I went up to that mosaic on the other side, of course, not the side that people could see, and I put my hand on there, and I prayed for every single person that was in the piazza, in the plaza, in St. Peter's Square, because everyone comes, people are drawn there, you know. If you visited there, you were drawn there. You know, it's not really a tourist attraction, but the holiness of John Paul II drew people, it drew millions of people. I can't explain to you what 2 million people or 5 million people looks like, because it's not something that probably most of us in our lifetime have ever seen, a conglomerate of that many people together. But I've seen it. I saw it, people coming to see St. John Paul II. He was was holy. He was eminently holy. But he just, it was like he was a bearer of God. He was a messenger of God.
I guess maybe talk about how he saw then the universal call to holiness. You talked about his holiness. How did he see everyone's call to holiness?
He wrote and talked much about that. He believes that every one of us, every human being, is called by God to holiness. So his theme is when he became Pope, his first speech that he gave when he became Pope was, "Do not be afraid. Come. The Lord is waiting. Do not be afraid." And you probably have seen films, you've probably seen movies of him, and he's standing in front of crowds of people saying that he not only believes, as though it's a private belief on his part, but he understands that every single person is called to holiness. Every one of us, it's in there. That life of holiness, those of us who have been baptized and who live a life, a sacramental life, we have the great privilege of having God within us. So many of us are unaware of what that means. What John Paul II wanted was that we would understand it. We would use the power of that awareness, use the power of that reality that's in us. That grace is deeply and strongly within us. And so he wanted that. He wanted that message to go out.
Well, I was just going to say, how did that intersect then with the role of the family as a domestic church in the call to holiness?
Well, I think one of the things, going back to some of the things that we were experiencing, he kept up with all the things going on in the world, and there was so much divorce. The issue of abortion was, very huge for him. The issue of the breakdown of the family was huge for him. And so, but he understood that a man and a woman who commit themselves through marriage, through the sacrament of marriage, to one another, into the family that they bring forth, it's a microcosm of the church. So you, as a married couple with your children, are a microcosm of the entire church. So you bring forth Christ, you nurture Christ, and you send Christ out in your children. So he saw that, he understood it, and he wanted us to understand. He wanted married couples and families. He had a year of the family. He dedicated a year to that. During the Great Jubilee, he had a jubilee of family life. He understood that the power and the goodness of the church can only be disseminated through the family. Really. I mean, I'm a religious, sisters are religious, and Father Andy's here. We have a certain role, but you actually have the whole composite. You have the family. You have the union between two people who have made a commitment to one another. You bring forth children. You can teach those children to go forth. You have the whole. If you look at the composition of the church and what it is, and you look at your own family life, it's one and the same. You have a small unit, but it's the same unit. So that's family life for him was really big, really big.
I think that's something that sometimes it's difficult for us to comprehend. We see people who are saints, even modern day saints like John Paul, and we say, well, maybe it was easy for that person, or that person was called to religious life, and so that maybe puts them on a fast track for that. But I'm just a layperson.
No, John
so
Paul.
We need to know that that's our call.
Yeah,
as well.
It's a call. It's a vocation, folks. It's a vocation. You have a very high vocation. And that is that you are the domestic church. You are the church of Christ on earth. You are that. So you make that commitment, that witness of commitment to one another that can only be made in the church. There are legal unions, which we know, and those are good unions. but you are blessed by the sacrament of marriage. And so the graces that come to you are full. They fill you. You have energy and power. You may not feel like you have it, but you have energy and power that no one else has. Because you build the church within your own. You collaborate with another person, man and woman. You collaborate with another person. You give yourself entirely to the other person, and you build a domestic church. John Paul II revered that. He revered that. So I'm so grateful to be here and to be with you.
Well, John Paul wasn't the only modern saint that you had contact with. You also, during your period of time there, had some contact with St. Mother Teresa in Calcutta as well. What were your impressions of her?
Well, Mother Teresa, St. Mother Teresa, yes, I did. I saw her, she came to Rome often, and I saw her often, and she was so humble. You know, she only had one thing on her mind, the poor, and that's really, really true. You know, if someone approached her, you know, because she's famous and all that, of course she would acknowledge them and she'd ask for money for the poor. Fame was nothing for her. She did not care. She didn't care how many cameras were around. She just wanted some money for the poor. And she was always building things. She was always opening houses and wanting to distribute for the poor. So she's a very, very, very humble person. I mean, no, spotlight was nothing for her. It just was nothing for her. But I think that's also, I found that with holy people that I have met, you know, the spotlight is not it's really not that important. It's not important at all, unless it's useful, and useful in the way that it can build up the body of Christ. That's where it's useful, but otherwise, you know, fame and whatever else might come with that high office, that's not the important thing. And those holy people know that, and they show it. You see it with them. You know, when you're in their presence, you know that you're in the presence of someone holy.
She was a frequent guest there, so she had a unique relationship with John Paul. II. And you've shared with us that relationship was not without its challenges, and that you had a role to play in facilitating the relationship.
Well, I mean, not really facilitating, but I did help some things along, because this no, I just mean that, you know, in every human aggregate, there are jealousies and, you know, all those little things that come up. You know, it happens among all of us here, too. We know what that feels like. So, same is true with the human beings. The Vatican is composed of human beings. You know, we're called to do something great for the church, but we're all human beings. So, you know, I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't be willing to say that, you know, we're sinful human beings. Well, anyway, Mother Teresa stirred up a little bit of those kind of jealousy things among people, and so why should she have a special place with John Paul II? Why couldn't somebody else like me have a special place with John Paul II? And so sometimes when she would write and ask to see him, the letter would just be put in a pile that should be generically answered. And that's one way that, and I don't mean to make that sound like an inferior way of responding, but because John Paul II got so much mail, of course, he couldn't humanly answer or even read all of the mail. So basically what we had to do, that was my job too, was to kind of summarize it and send it to him, or say 50 or 100 people wrote, and after World Youth Day in Denver, and they wanted to, you know, they were asking for a certain thing, the beatification of someone. So what I would do is just write 100 people wrote asking for the beatification of Brian. And so
never going to happen. Ask God.
He would get that message. So that's what I mean by generic. You know, he couldn't possibly read all those letters individually. So sometimes her letter was put in a generic pile. But I saw the pile, so I could
Share a miracle story that you
Okay. This was an amazing thing. As I told you, one of the things that I did was I opened his mail, I read it, sorted it, things that I thought, I didn't have the last word, but I thought he should read himself. You know, I'd put in a separate pile, I'd put a note on it, flip a note on it and say, I think that the Holy Father should read this. It went again to another set of eyes and another set of eyes. So whether or not he ever read what I recommended, I'll never know. But there was a letter that came from a man, and this was really startling to me. He was out in the general audience, and the general audience at that time was in the St. Peter's Square. So I could look down from my office every Wednesday, and I saw the whole thing. And I saw John Paul out there, and I just saw the whole thing. So this one day, a letter came from a man who said he wanted to share something with St. John Paul II that happened while they were in the audience. And his wife, I don't remember what she had. She had a disease. Anyway, she was...
Was it Parkinson's?
I don't think it was Parkinson's. It was... Well, let's say it was Parkinson's. It was a very debilitating and terminal disease. She was in the final stages of that disease, final stages. So, she had one desire, and that was to come to Rome and see St. John Paul II. So, her husband arranged that the two of them would fly to Rome, and they were just going to stay overnight, just the night of the audience, and then they were going to fly back home. Because she couldn't do anything. She was wheelchair bound, but even a wheelchair was almost too much for her. But she wanted to see St. John Paul II. So the husband made arrangements for the two of them to go to the general audience. And that's an easy thing to do. Anybody can write for tickets, ask for tickets to the general audience. So he did that, and he got them. But he brought her in a wheelchair. And what he didn't know was that anyone that came in a wheelchair was brought right up to the front and would be right there, right next to St. John Paul II. He didn't know that at all. And of course, he was the one that was pushing the wheelchair, so he went up with her. So they were standing there. I mean, they went through the whole audience. And then at the end of the audience, after the Holy Father gives the apostolic blessing, then he goes to the sick. He would walk to each individual person who was there and gave them special blessing. So he came to her and blessed her. And he said to her, you're going to be all right. And so, I mean, that's a nice thing to say, but she was kind of in the last stages of this disease. So they were most grateful to have been blessed by him, most grateful. So they were finished, and then he took the wheelchair out, and he had to push her, through the whole St. Peter's Square out to the taxi stand right out in the front. And they got as far as the taxi stand, and now he's writing all this to the Pope. He said, we got to the taxi stand, and she said, I think I can stand up. And he said, I don't think you better try that right now. He said, no, I really mean it. I think I can stand up. So she stood up, and she got into the taxi, and she said, I think I'm fine. I'm okay. And so they got back to the hotel, and they went through getting ready to go back because they flew back the next day. And she boarded the plane, walked down the plane. And so he said this, and he said, I just wanted to tell you what happened. And then she made it an appointment with her neurologist and went, and he looked at her, and he ran all the tests that were necessary to diagnose this disease that she had. There wasn't a trace of it anywhere. A known trace of disease in her anywhere. Not even a history, not even a trace of a history of having had the disease. There was just nothing there. She was completely healthy. And so he just said, I want to thank you. So that was the letter. And so I, of course, put a note on there and I said, he should see this. So a little, I would say maybe a month later, I opened another letter, and it was from a neurologist. And he said, I just wanted to write this to you. I have a patient, and he said, it's a strange experience for me, but he said, I don't know how to explain it in the way she does, because he said, I'm Jewish, so I don't understand Catholic practices, and she's Catholic. But she had this disease, and she was in the final stages of this disease, and she went to Rome, and she was blessed by you. And she came back, and there was nothing wrong with her. And he said, so I did all the tests, all the diagnostic tests on her that I had done in order to make the diagnosis that confirmed the positiveness of this disease. And he said, doesn't show anything. There's no sign of the disease, nothing. And he said, she said it's because of the blessing you gave her. Now, I don't understand that, but I'm just telling you what happened. That's what he said to me. So, it's just, it's amazing. And those things happen often. They happen often. Another story that I saw happen, the Holy Father used to he'd celebrate Mass at 7 o'clock in his own private chapel. And, people could ask to go to that Mass. He always wanted people there, but they could only fit about 10 people, 5 on each side, in the chapel. So you could call and say, you'd have to call in advance, and just say, I would like to be able to attend the Holy Father's Mass. And then, if it's possible, they'll say, you be at the bronze doors at this time, and we'll bring you up. So there was a couple, this is an American couple too, they came up and they had a picture of their granddaughter. Their granddaughter was born blind. She had no sight at all. And so they brought her picture, and they asked him to bless her by blessing the picture. And they explained to him that she was born blind, she'd never seen anything, and I think she was like 8 years old at that point or something. And so he blessed the picture. And so they called home right after the Mass, got back to the hotel, called home, and they said he blessed her through her picture. And their daughter said she can see. So it was she could see at that moment. The mother did not understand what happened to her, but she began to see. So it was through that blessing, so many things like that. He had that gift, he had the gift of miraculous healing. So
well, it's hitting the end of the time, but those are amazing stories.
Yeah.
We appreciate your time and coming out here this evening. Are there any questions before we close with you? Does anybody have a question?
Just curious. Calcutta came to Rome often. What kinds of things would she be doing with the Pope that she needed to come and talk to him about? What was that?
I don't know exactly, but I know that they were friends. I think the Pope looked to her and she looked to the Pope. I think they were really spiritual friends.
Okay.
So I think that's all. That's what I would say.
Just the sharing of
Yeah, sharing of the faith. Yeah, and then the church.
I was just interested in your degrees in philosophy and speech language pathology. How have those been useful to you in your work and your
It's a good question. I don't know. I finished my doctorate in speech pathology, and I had worked as a speech pathologist prior to getting my doctorate, and then during that time too, and for a little while after that. And then there was a need. This isn't what happened to me. The Sisters of Light were being formed, and they were in New York, and they needed someone to come and assist with their formation. And they had already asked, you probably all know Mother Assumpta in Ann Arbor. They had asked her to come and direct their formation. And then Cardinal O'Connor, who was their, he's the founder, he had called our Superior General and said, could you please send a sister to work with Mother Assumpta, because we need more than one. So I don't know how I got called. I think I was just more available at the time. And so I got sent to New York. And I was there for just 1 year until they finished their novitiate. And so I came back, and I was going back to Bethlehem, Connecticut. That's where I live. And I was going to begin a clinic. Because we have clinics. And I was going to begin a clinic there. And then I got a call saying that we had to go to Boston and meet this priest who was from Rome, who wanted to talk to us. So the Superior General and myself went to Boston, and we met with this priest. And then 3 weeks later, I was in a plane going to Rome. So I don't know how it happened. It doesn't have anything to do with my degree, though.
I want to close this off with a prayer that Pope St. John Paul II wrote. It's in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, you are our Creator. Guide us on all the paths we travel upon this earth. Free us from all the evil tendencies which lead our hearts away from your will. Never allow us to stray from you. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
If you haven't had a chance to look at some of these posters that are hanging up, they're great. There's one back there from Mother Teresa. It's the last thing I'll leave you with before you go. If you want to change the world, go home and love your family. Thank you, sister, for being here.
I too want to thank Sister for joining us tonight. Sister and I we were neighbors for 4 years when I was over at the cathedral. So it's always wonderful to have Sister Yvonne here, and thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And thank you, all of you, for making time at the end of what I know is an exhausting weekend. Because many of you have come back from vacation. It's not, you're not in the ordinary mode of things. So I think you could probably use a little extra blessing tonight, yes? All right. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
And may Almighty God be upon you in good times and in bad. May He be your calm in times of disturbance. He always share His peace with you and fill your hearts with love and admiration for one another and for Him. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
And of course, thank you. June 2nd, we had a little change in calendar. These snow days, they just keep. So June 2nd, Father Andy Laframboise will be with us. One of his first official sharings of his work at the John Paul II Institute in DC. So he completes his certificate of studies in May, I believe, and then will be the first to be able to hear and partake of his knowledge and wisdom from studies in DC. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.